Good to see you all here today. Okay, first of all, just to check, how are we going? Sound is all right? Sound okay? Yep. Okay, good. We'll spend some time together today and next week and discussing some topics which I previously discussed with Venerable Chanda, and so she wanted me to speak on these issues, or encouraged me to. And good to see some folks who I met when I was in Europe, some folks who I met when I was in Sydney, and some folks who I haven't met. So good to see you all. I hope you're all doing well. Is that right? Are we doing okay? Are we surviving all right? I don't know. Seems like everything's like really bad and stressful and everything. So I don't know. I don't want to make any assumptions, but yeah, if uh, um, if if when everything is bad, or when everything's like really stressful or whatever, then we can the Dhamma hopefully gives us some values and some meaning to help us to navigate that, and that's hopefully what we're here for. I don't know if do we want to introduce ourselves or something? Do we want people maybe throw onto chat, like just to say hi or something like that? um uh and I don't know, a fun fact about ourselves or something like that, where we live or whatever. No, don't have to say that if you don't want to, or just like Sydney. Anyway, if you want to just introduce yourself, then please feel free to do so. I'm in Harris Park in Sydney, in the land of the Barramadigal people of the Darug Nation. So in Australia, we have the custom of acknowledging the Indigenous community who was on the land that we're speaking. And so this particular place is called, like the main suburb here is called Parramatta, which is after Barramadigal, which apparently means the place where the eels lie down to rest. And I saw a interesting, I don't know, coincidence or something, just the other day. Just yesterday, I was going for a walk down by the river here. And the reason that the eels lie down to rest here is because the fresh water from the mountains comes, and the salt water from the sea comes, and this is where they mingle. And eels have a famously esoteric life cycle, where they come in and they spawn in the river here, and then they go through different underground streams or drains or something, and then they somehow appear in the middle of the ocean, and they sort of, nobody quite knows exactly how their life cycle works or where they go and so on. And so one of the local luminaries in Buddhism is an Aboriginal elder called Dr. Francis Bodkin, who is a good friend of the Buddhist community here in Sydney, and we've done a number of events together. Everyone calls her Auntie Fran. And she was such an astonishing individual. When she's very elderly now, she's probably 90 or something now, but when she was a young woman, she went to university to study biology. And she eventually got a letter from the university where they said to her, "Dear Miss Bodkin, can we ask you to please graduate, as we don't have any more courses left to offer you?" And so she's spent her whole life in doing research, and she's like unified a lot of Aboriginal, traditional knowledge of the lands together with the scientific knowledge, and still doing a lot of that research. Last time I met her, she's well into her 80s, and she's still doing research into like plant clusters in the Sydney Basin, how they're mediated by different fungi and these kinds of things. And she's actively running research at the university here. So that's Frances Bodkin. The reason I mentioned her was because I was down by the river and there was a ferry, and it was named after her. And I thought, oh, that's nice, the Frances Bodkin ferry. So I thought, oh, well, that's something nice to see for today. All right. So very lovely to see all of your messages here. And shall we do some meditation? Would that be good? Yeah. Do you have any particular requests for meditation? Like normally I'll just do a mindfulness of breathing meditation. Is there anything else you'd like to do? Somebody wants something different. Moo wants something different, but that's only because you come to too many of my Dhamma talks, Moo. Appreciation is powerful, right? Meditation on appreciation or gratitude, katanyu, is also very powerful. Yeah, this is true. Okay, so I'll tell you what, we might do a meditation on mindfulness of breathing, and we'll do a reflection on gratitude as well while we're here, especially at the end of the meditation. So let's do that. Okay. No, no, actually, let's do that. Let's do a meditation on gratitude. I haven't done one of those for a while. Let's do that. Okay, so sorry for changing my mind. Let's do a meditation on gratitude. Thank you for the suggestion. So we'll meditate for about 20 minutes or something like that. Does that sound reasonable? Yeah. Okay, let's begin. So sitting quietly, with the mind settled down inside the body. Closing your eyes, feeling whatever is. Whatever is happening inside your energies, feelings, sensations in your body. And taking a minute to just be settled in your body and to leave behind whatever's in the past, to not run off to whatever's in the future, and just to be satisfied with what is here in the present. As the mind is settled in the present, and that's to bring to mind all those things that we have to be grateful for. We can start with ourselves. And we can be grateful for ourselves because we are here. We have brought us along this journey. All of the many good things that have happened in our life, all of the many bad things that we've avoided have come because of what we've done, because of who we are. And it doesn't mean that we don't make mistakes. But somehow even our mistakes have led us to where we are today. And we can be grateful for our parents who brought us into this world, raised us, nourished us, and given us the things that we needed to succeed in life, and who have loved us, perhaps imperfectly, but nonetheless. Grateful to our siblings, if we have them, who have been with us on this journey through life. Grateful for our friends, who have been with us in times of joy and have lifted us up in times of sadness. Grateful for our partner, if we have one, for putting up with us and being there and caring about us more than we know. Grateful for our cats and dogs or other pets that bring joy into our life. Grateful for our neighbors and our community. Grateful for our colleagues at work. Grateful for the people who do all the work that makes our life possible. Grateful for those who collect the garbage, who cook the food. Grateful for farmers who grow the food, those who transport it. Grateful for those who work at shops that we can get stuff from. Grateful for all those who have fought for humanity, for equal rights, for justice, for fairness, for prosperity, all of those things that we benefit from every day, but we don't really remember. Grateful for the bricklayers, the painters, the plasterers, the electricians, the plumbers, the architects, surveyors who built the houses and the buildings that we're in right now. Grateful for scientists who explore how the world is and show us the truth of the world. Grateful for our teachers, taught us how to read and write, how to do maths, how to have the basic skills we need to live in this world. Grateful for the nurses and the doctors and all of those people who worked in health, for the dentists, all those people who've kept us safe, healed our illness, looked after us when we were unwell. Grateful to the Buddha for putting everything on the line to discover the Dhamma and then sharing that with all of us. Grateful to the Sangha for conveying the Dhamma and to the Buddhist communities for supporting and practicing that for all of these years. Grateful for our spiritual teachers and grateful for our spiritual companions, those who share with us that search for freedom and for the truth. Okay, so now coming near to the end of the meditation. And I want you to bring your mind back into your body, into the experience of your senses, and to just take a minute to check back over the meditation, inquiring into cause and effect. Ask yourself what just happened. Ask yourself how you used your mind. What was that meditation on gratitude like? How is your mind now compared to how it was at the start of the meditation? And finally, we can dedicate the merit of our practice. May all beings be happy. May all beings be well. May all beings realize Nibbana. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. All right. So, I forgot to mention one. Someone I forgot to mention that to be grateful for is the fine folks at Zoom who have made this meeting possible. And when COVID hit, the whole world was suddenly run on Zoom. You can imagine what it was like running around in the offices there trying to keep the whole thing going. And they managed to keep it going and reasonably, relatively non-evil. I think Zoom is relatively non-evil compared to most of them. I mean, there are alternatives and so on, but it's a lot of work to keep doing this service. So anyway, thanks to the engineers and other folks at Zoom who kept us connected. Okay, so the talk for this evening is on, I believe the topic given was where ethics and politics meet. Is that correct? Just double check that. Right. Okay. Is that? Can anyone confirm that for me? I just want to make sure that we're on the same page here. Oh no, that's on my thing, right? All right. Yeah, okay. That's correct. Yeah. So today is topic for today is where ethics meets politics, and the topic for tomorrow is chipping away at misogyny. Okay, great. Um, so yeah, these were topics which I discussed previously with Venerable Chanda, and that she asked me to speak about. So let's dive into that. Obviously, one of the reasons for talking about the topic of where ethics meets politics is because politics has become something that's become, unfortunately, increasingly difficult to ignore. I don't know if it ever was really impossible to ignore, but increasingly um, worrying and disturbing. Uh, I'm worried and disturbed by it. I don't know whether you guys are, but I certainly am, and a lot of people are. And obviously, events in the United States have been very disturbing. When I was traveling in Europe at the end, at around where was it? Around December or something. It was around December. We went through. There was like a week where like the German government didn't have like a. They went, and then the French government went, and then the Korean government went, and the Syrian government went, and then you. This all happened within like a few days. Most of them kind of tottered back onto some kind of semblance of sanity. And there was a point in time for a few days there where you could actually say the sentence, the only functioning, the largest functioning government in the EU was Italy, which was not a sentence that probably anyone really expects to be able to say. But anyway, politics has a way of sort of coming around and a way of being relevant, even though most of us, I'm assuming, probably most of us probably come to spiritual practice and we're not really kind of here in order to do that. What I would like to suggest very simply is that we shouldn't use Buddhism and our spiritual practice as an excuse or as a justification for not being involved, or for not caring, and for not trying to do what we can. I also want to just be careful of making too much of a like a kind of a normative statement in this area. Like I think people are just very different. I think people have different characters and different tendencies. And like it's not the case that everyone's going to be an activist. It's not the case that everyone's going to be a politician. It's not the case that everyone's going to be a renunciate. And a lot of that really just depends on, I don't know, on weird past life personality stuff that we don't really understand. But I do want to kind of suggest that at the very least I want to suggest that the Dhamma is open enough and nourishing enough that it provides an opportunity and a support for all of us to be able to live a good life and live our best life in the best way that we can. And that we can give support in many ways, big or small, which might mean getting elected to Parliament. It might mean going on a protest, writing a letter. It might mean giving some support to friends. It might mean whatever. It can be expressed in countless different ways. And so I'm not trying to say, I don't want to sell you on a particular way in which you have to express those things. I want you to be able to find those things for yourself. But I do want to say that the way that we live and the way that we express ourselves socially should also be informed by our practice of Dhamma and the values that we're learning through the Dhamma. So Dhamma isn't just something that happens in a temple, and it's not just something that happens in a meditation seat. It should be something that informs the values by which we live. Now, I am going to begin for this evening, where I'm going to begin this evening by reading a short passage from the suttas. This is from the Kuttadanta Sutta, Digha Nikaya number 5. I'll pop that into the link for you if you want. Okay, so it's a long kind of sutta. I'm not going to give all of the background to the sutta, but the basic idea is that the Buddha is telling this story he's been questioned by a Brahmin who wants to offer a sacrifice, and the Buddha is now responding by telling a story of a legendary story of the past. And so this is the legendary story. I might abbreviate a little bit, but more or less here. The Buddha said this: once upon a time, Brahman, there was a king named Mahavijita. He was rich, affluent, and wealthy, with lots of gold and silver, property and assets, money and grain, and a full treasury and storehouses. As King Vijita was in private retreat, this thought came to his mind: I have achieved human wealth and reign after conquering this vast territory. Why don't I hold a large sacrifice? That will be for my lasting welfare and happiness. So I'm just going to comment briefly on things as we go past. First of all, it says Mahavijita was in private retreat. It doesn't necessarily mean he was on a meditation retreat. It just meant that he'd gone for some solitude or something like this. But it is kind of interesting, like if we look in the suttas, how often it happens that it's when somebody is on by themselves alone that a thought of significance comes to them. And that, I think, is just, I mean, this is a bit incidental to the topic, but I think this is one thing that technology is taking away from us, is the ability to just be alone with your thoughts, with your feelings, and to just let whatever needs to come to the surface come to the surface. Not every thought that you have in private is going to be a good one. Like this particular one: why don't I have a great big sacrifice? I don't know, not the best thought that anybody's had, but at least he's looking for his benefit. All right, fine. So he summoned Brahmin high priest, the Purohita, and said to him just now, I had this thought. The Brahmin high priest said to him, so just to let you know, like, what's going on here in terms of the personal dynamics in kingship at that time. The royal family was a Khattiya family, an aristocratic clan, and they were anointed and advised by what they call the Purohita, who was like a family chaplain, who would be the regular advisor, but also teacher and mentor. So the Purohita would have been, so in a way, you can think of it like, say, in England, they'd have the system with like the Archbishop of Canterbury or something like that, who'll do like the wedding for the royal family and stuff like that. It's a little bit like that. But the Purohita would actually like live in the palace with the royal family and would have been regularly giving lessons and so on to the princes and princesses as they grew up, so that they would have been getting their education. So this is somebody who they knew each other well. And so his role was to be giving advice, wise advice to the kings. Not that they would always do that, but sometimes they would. So the king's realm is harried and oppressed. Raiding of villages, towns, and cities has been seen, and infesting of highways. But if the king were to extract more taxes, while his realm is thus harried and oppressed, he would not be doing his duty. Now, the king might think, I'll eradicate this plague of savages by execution or imprisonment or confiscation or condemnation or banishment. But that's not the right way to eradicate this plague of savages. Those who remain after the killing will return to harass the king's realm. Okay, so again, let me just stop briefly. I mean, I don't know about you, but this feels like very relevant to our current situation, certainly to the situation in the United States, and equally to the situation in the UK with Brexit and so on, largely to stem the supposed hordes of savages that were invading and harassing the realm, so to speak. And in Australia. And so in Australia, since the 90s, we've had like a very toxic and hardline immigration policy driven by the extreme right, which has, to a disturbing extent, become a mainstream policy in Australia. And it's particularly disturbing because Australia is, I don't know if you've ever checked on a map, but we're not exactly accessible per se. And it's not like America where you can just like cross over the border. You have to, it's quite difficult to get here. And the actual numbers of people who have been coming as asylum seekers is fairly modest, all things considered. And yet it's become this political football that's being used to generate hate. And yeah, so the advice given here that if you use violence to suppress these things, it's not going to work because they'll always come back, because you're just creating more hatred and more lasting hatred. I mean, it seems intuitively obvious. Seems like this is not something that requires a huge kind of leap of intellect to grasp. But these policies of oppression never work. And it always backfires because you just create more hate, and you create generational hate, which will echo down through the ages. And this is what we're seeing in Gaza. This is what we're seeing in the United States, and we're seeing in Ukraine and in other places as well, where you can't. The Russians think that they can solve the Ukrainian problem by invading them and subjugating. It's not going to work. The Israelis think they can solve the Palestinian problem. It's not going to work. None of these things are actually going to work. And so the people who are presenting these policies imagine that they are being realist. This is in fact the kind of the political doctrine which is often used to justify these things. It's realistic. We're living in a real world where power dominates, and in that real world where power dominates, you either have to beat or be beaten. And it just doesn't work like that, because people are still around, and you can't like expect that violence is going to, on a wide scale or on a genocidal scale, is going to accomplish whatever that you wanted. Now, in that last line, it says, "Those who remain after the killing," right? So this is where violence becomes genocide, right? So if those who remain after the killing are going to come back, well, the solution is fairly obvious, right? That there shouldn't be any who remain after the killing, that you have to literally just wipe them all out. And that's where the end result of those policies of violence is a policy of genocide and policies of eugenics, which are now mainstream in the United States, certainly. Rather, here is a plan. So the Brahmin priest continues, here is a plan relying on which the plague of savages will be properly uprooted. So that the king, so I should say, mention just briefly the term the plague of savages here. Difficult to find a term that's going to sort of convey the right sense in English, but the basic idea is that these would have been some kind of peoples who lived outside the civic society of what was the dominant Aryan culture at the time. So that dominant culture would have spoken Pali or Sanskrit or something like that. These would have been non-Indo-European speakers. They call Mlecha, and they would have been perhaps hill tribes, perhaps indigenous peoples or something like that. Perhaps maybe not, though. I mean, maybe it might also be talking about like groups of bandits and things like that who were like exiles or something. So maybe not always indigenous people, but basically generically those who were seen as being posing some kind of threat. Anyway, so let the king provide seed and fodder for those in the realm who work in growing crops and raising cattle. Let the king provide funding for those who work in trade. Let the king guarantee food and wages for those in government service. Hang on. I'm sorry. Is the Buddha saying that government can do some good things sometimes? Is he saying the government has an actual duty to help look after people? I believe he is. And I believe that we've been told for decades now that government is essentially useless and that it's always inefficient and it's always corrupt and blah, blah, blah. And I know this is kind of different in different places, but certainly in the Anglosphere, this is the kind of dominant message that we've been going under for many decades now. And I don't kind of want to go into that too much, but it's always been a lie, and it's always been wrong to say government has always played a mixed role. Government can serve good and it can serve evil, and our role should be to try to ensure that government serves the role of good, rather than saying that government can't be used for anything at all, if we're going to have a government. So looking seed and fodder for those who work in growing crops and raising cattle. That means agricultural support, right? Still remains very important today because agriculture is hard work and it's uncertain, especially as we're facing climate change. And trying to figure out what you can grow and what you can't grow is really difficult in a changing climate. It's difficult anyway, and it's especially difficult in a changing climate when you have drought, you have fire, you have temperature changes. All of those things make agriculture far more difficult, and it's something that we need to be investing a lot more in right now if we want to have food to eat for the future. And I know that Europe has been having a major heat wave recently, and the shift globally, the shift in temperatures has Europe has been like higher than average, if not one of the high. It's not one of the greatest regions in terms of the shift from the average. In Australia, we also face a huge problem that we almost never talk about because most Australian farmland is highly marginal land. And where I come from in Western Australia, so where Bodhinyana Monastery is and Dhammasara Monastery is, we're in the hills next to Perth. And if you go past those hills, about not far from the coast, 50 kilometers from the coast or something, then there's a big area that goes on for like 500 kilometers we call the wheat belt. And that's flat land, which is very dry and very marginal, and which currently grows a lot of wheat, especially other things as well. But that land is extremely vulnerable, and I think almost certainly that's going to become desert in the not too distant future, as is much other land in Australia as well. So the places that we can grow food are going to change, and the kinds of food we can grow in different places is going to change. And it can't be left up to farmers to be able to manage all those changes just by themselves. It's just not possible. So you can't just say, oh look, I'm growing whatever wheat this year, and I'm going to grow something else next year. It doesn't work like that. You have to have a major capital investment, retraining, all of those kinds of things. It has to happen gradually. It has to happen in cooperation with communities. So this is something which is, again, straight out of the suttas of food security, working with the people on the land to be able to support people to be able to do their work. Then the next one, let the king provide funding for those who work in trade. Okay, also kind of interesting, right? In the Buddha's day, trade was not such a big deal as it is today, obviously, right? So most trade was fairly local, and the furthest that trade went was still within the Gangetic Valley, more or less, so Gangetic Plain. Not long after the time of the Buddha, trade extended to the west, to Greece and Rome, and then a little bit after that, also through Eastern Asia to China. So there was kind of global trade from about 200 or 300 years after the Buddha. But in the time of the Buddha, most trade was still within that region. It's still a large region. Trade is also risky. And there's many stories we find in the suttas of trade caravans and so on who get lost in the desert or who get attacked by bandits and so on and so forth. So providing some support for people to do that. And that again is something which is especially important to do in a time of climate change, because the things that we were doing in the past, we're not going to be able to do them in the future. The things that previously would make money are not going to be able to make money. Things that previously provided a service are not going to be working, and we're going to have to transition to doing more different kinds of things, many of which we don't really know what they're going to be. We don't know what's going to work. And so there needs to be support for those things. And let the king guarantee food and wages for those in government service, right? Okay, first of all, can I just quickly ask, is there anybody on this chat who works for the government? Is anyone here who's working for the government? Yes? No? No one's working for the government, really? Kind of, Surakshi? No? No? Really? Interesting. So, okay, so working for the government, until fairly recently, in most places, to have a government job was considered to be quite prestigious, right? It's a good thing to do. You have a regular job, it's a respected job. You have connections, and you're seen as being literally a civil servant, somebody who serves your society, and it's considered to be actually a good thing to do. And so again, we have largely changed that, so that now we see civil service as being a dead-end job where you're stuck behind a desk doing nothing meaningful, endlessly navigating a meaningless bureaucracy, and so on and so forth. And all of those things are, in fact, the glue that keeps society together, the things that keep things running. So don't look down on civil servants and public servants. They do incredible work all the time. And all of us are relying on the work of government officials all the time, keeping the lights on, keeping the roads going, educating kids, putting health services, all of those kinds of things all the time that make our life possible without us even realizing or noticing. And often they do it without adequate wages and support. Specifically, I'm going to say for teachers, especially teachers in government schools, generally speaking, don't get enough money. They don't get enough support. Now, obviously, that's going to be different in different countries, and it's going to be relative. But generally speaking, I think that teachers and nurses and people like that who work do incredible work that keep people alive and educate and make society possible. And I think we should personally, my personal belief is that we should swap the wages for CEOs and nurses and teachers. Like nurses and teachers should be getting $1 million a year, and CEOs should be working on it. Just basically, they should get their lunch paid for them or something like that, because it doesn't actually take any particular skills. It's not very hard. Just have to have some meetings and play some golf and good enough to go. So that's my understanding of being a CEO. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. That's just what it seems to me. So we don't value enough those people who are actually making the real difference and really creating our society. This is one of the reasons, I believe, why we're facing such a crisis in democracy, because we haven't valued those who are the work that is actually building up the true basis for communal living. Okay, so then the people occupied with their own work will not harass the realm. The king's revenues will be great. This is very interesting. When you provide government funding for people who are doing work, revenues will be great. This is Keynesian economics. The Buddha literally invented Keynesian economics. It should be called Buddhismian economics, right? But they just didn't call it Buddhismian economics because it didn't sound very good. So they call it Keynesian, so that's fine. But literally, that's the idea. When you invest in society, people are prosperous and everybody benefits. Yeah. So this is actually giving us a very, very specific and quite detailed proposal for what the role of a government is, why it's there, and how we can be using the government to address the actual root causes of the issue and creating a society where people are, as the next sentence says, when the country is secured as a sanctuary, free of being harried and oppressed, the happy people with joy in their hearts, dancing with children at their breast, will dwell as if their houses were wide open. Yeah. And then the king agreed with the high priest's advice and followed his recommendation. He summoned the Brahmin high priest and said to him, I've eradicated the plague of savages, and relying on your plan, my revenue is now great. And since the country is secured as a sanctuary, free of being harried and suppressed, the happy people with joy in their hearts, dancing with children at their breast, dwell as if their houses were wide open. I mean, it sounds pretty good, right? It sounds like there's a kind of this isn't like a bizarre utopian idea, right? There's not like a proposal to solve all the problems in society. Everything that's being talked about here is very reasonable and very normal. These are actually normal things that governments do all the time. But I think we lose sight of what really matters, and we forget what is important. And no, the role of the government is not to interfere in people's lives altogether. And of course, I'm not in any way ignoring the fact that governments can do lots of terrible things, and absolutely that's not the point of this. But it is to say that let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater, and let's not forget the fact that when we bring a sense of principle to our societal and political consideration, that makes a genuine difference in how things can be and how things can run. When it says here, the phrase here, when the country is secured as a sanctuary, the word for sanctuary here is one of my favorite words in Pali. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to go on a little bit of a disquisition into Pali and Indian history here. So the words I'm translating as sanctuary is kema. Kema is, it seems, originally the meaning of kema was something like oasis. And the basic idea was that you would be like nomads, and the ancient Indo-European maybe nomads traveling across the Central Asian plains with their caravans of cows and horses, and the ground was rocky and the sun was harsh and it was not very pleasant. And then at the end of the day, you see an oasis, some trees, a lake, a spring of water, some grass. And so when you arrive there, then you yoga kema, you release the yokes, the burdens from the animal beasts of burden, and you relax. You have a bath, light a fire, and sit around the fire telling some stories and just enjoying that time at the end of the day. And so that idea of a kema became the idea of sanctuary, that it's a place of safety where people can go. And this relates to in Indigenous culture as well. A few years ago, we did a retreat in Central Australia, and we stayed with the Pitjantjatjara people there. And one of the guides there told us that near where we were staying was a spring at the bottom of some cliffs. If you've ever been to Central Australia, you will know that this is very precious, very unusual. Have a spring of beautiful, clear drinking water, just like a deep, beautiful pool of water. It's incredible. And he told us that that they would never stay near that place, and they would always stay a few miles away, and they would never hunt any animals who went there. So this is that same idea, the idea of a kema. It's a sanctuary. It's a place of protection. It really is a sacred place, because all the animals need to feel safe, and they need to feel that they can come and get a drink and that they can live. And if the Aboriginal people are going to live, they'll live a few miles away. It wasn't until white people came that they decided, hey, this is a nice place for a campsite, and they set up camp next to the spring and next to the waterhole, and then all the animals would stay away because they no longer had their kema. So this is the idea of kema. It's actually a really lovely idea, and you find this a lot in the Darug stories, and a lot of stories about how people and animals would negotiate a kind of a realm of safety, like a lake or a forest or something like that, where humans and nature would be able to coexist with mutual respect. So this is just one example of how we find in the suttas that the Buddha handles talking about politics. Now you can see there's a number of characteristics about what the Buddha is talking about here, the content of what he's talking about, but also the manner of what he's doing. Like, it's kind of indirect. He's not telling the Brahmin, you have to do this. He's not telling kings, you have to do this. He's kind of saying, oh, well, there was a story from the past. And so he's sort of saying it in a way that's getting the point across without being too direct. And, we see this a number of times when the Buddha talked on such matters, notably at the beginning of the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, when he gave advice when Ajatasattu announced he wanted to invade the Vajjian people. So the Buddha wasn't a revolutionary, and he was not sort of advocating that we should change our government system to be something else. But he was an advocate of principle, of what we call Dhamma. And Dhamma has an aspect of like internal, integrity and sense of principle inside yourself. And it also has a sense of like an external set of rules and principles by which a society is going to operate. And so as Buddhists and as Dhamma practitioners, it's crucial that we find a way to express our Dhamma through the Dhamma of how our world lives. That means asking ourselves, what are those values of kindness, those values of respect, those values of mutual support? And part of doing that means to learn a reasonable degree of facility in understanding the different ways that political messaging is being used and being manipulated. because obviously this is something which has been raised to I don't know about fine art, actually, most of it is fairly basic, but is constantly infiltrating in social media, in the media, and so on and so forth. And people are using these kinds of tricks of words and plays of words to be able to get you to accept unpalatable things, or to deprive you of to separate you from the values which you know you hold dear. I'll just give one example of that, and that's humor. And so this is one of the fundamental techniques which the fascist and the extreme right have been using in order to normalize their ideas, introduce things as jokes. And if somebody complains about it, it's like, why don't you have a sense of humor? And so these jokes can then be misogynistic, they can then be transphobic, they can then be racist, they can then be all of these things. Oh, it's just a joke. There a few years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago now, there was a Nazi website called Stormfront, who was kind of at the forefront of spreading these things before it became normalized into Twitter and so on. And they actually had their guide for writers. And part of their guide for writers was to say, always phrase things in a way that you have like plausible deniability, or you can explain it away as a joke. It's not like this thing is just happens to be that way. It's something which they have taught themselves over the years. And, we live in a world where all of these ideas, which obviously are taken from the Nazis and from the fascists and from the worst, most extreme and most horrifying, the eugenicists, and just these horrible kind of things, and yet they're phrased in a way to avoid some of the those connotations. Right? We don't call ourselves Nazis. We don't actually wave a swastika, right? And therefore we can't be Nazis. We don't actually like doing Sieg Heils. Or even when Elon Musk does one, then everyone is jumping on the thing, say, well, he didn't really mean it. Was it really a Hitler salute? And everybody's trying to explain it away. Whereas the fact is that the values and the policies that these people have been advancing have been imbued with the bigotry, the hatred, the violence, and the ignorance and delusion of these extreme totalitarian movements. And that's been happening for a long time. So I think it's important for us to be educated enough to be able to not be fooled by these things. Make sure that one of the fundamental tricks of Nazis, fascists, totalitarians, authoritarians, whatever you want to call them, is lies. It's the industrialized propagation of delusion. And today they use AI, they use social media to be able to create unreality and to industrialize the spread of unreality. And we, as Dhamma practitioners, should be standing against that. What does that mean? It means always check your sources. It means do not share anything or promote anything until you've checked it, really. And don't normalize the spreading of AI produced images. Don't normalize the spreading of AI anything, to be honest. Don't normalize just amplifying hate and reactivity. So one of the ways that we need to use our speech in a way that is constructive and meaningful and truthful, and that establishes that that kind of speech is normal. Like, it's normal to speak truthfully and to speak beneficially and to try to bring people together and to use your speech in a way that's actually trying to make the world a better place. So when you're engaging on social media or in your workplace or in your family and so on, then this is our practice of right speech. The threats that we face and the challenges we face are enormous, and I do not have solutions for particularly any of them, really. But I think that we to begin with, we need to not be in denial of what's happening. The ongoing massacre of democracy and any kind of democratic ideals in the United States is not an isolated incident. Democracy has been declining globally for roughly 20 years or so now. And most of the world's people today live in countries that are significantly less democratic than they were 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And that's the reality of it. So what we can do is to keep the lights on. We can hold the line. We can recognize when there are these kinds of assaults on our rights, assaults on democracy, assaults especially on those who are weak and poor and underprivileged, and we can stand up for those and make sure that the onslaught of untruth and unreality at least doesn't get past us, and it's not going to be amplified by us. So that's just a few words on the relationship between ethics and politics, and particularly with the Kuttadanta Sutta, Digha Nikaya number 5, and some reflections for you. I'd like to. Hopefully, we have some time for some Q&A, and I'd like to open it up if anyone would like to say anything or have any comments. Casey, yeah. Oh no, Surakshi's got first. It looks like.
Hi, thank you so much for that really interesting talk. I was wondering when you mentioned about humor and jokes, and I know like during lockdown, some of my friends were kind of talking about jokes, and they were talking about sort of like LGBTQI plus and how like some of that wokeness has gone too far. And I'm just wondering, like, how would you suggest people kind of like tackle that in terms of in a skillful way, so that you kind of you can maintain the friendship, but also enlighten people?
Good question. I do not know. Yeah, I mean, I know it is. I can't agree more that giving people equality and equal rights and treating people as decent human beings. I mean, there has to be limits on that, right? I mean, you can't like just completely treat people as being human beings like all the time. I mean, you can't, equal rights. I mean, they get equal-ish, right? But it can't be like really equal. Honestly, I find these things so absurd. But you're quite right to identify like that's one avenue where language is being perverted, right? So the word woke, of course, originated as African American slang in the sense of being aware of systematic societal injustices, and that's basically what it means. And now it's become this kind of universal term. I honestly, Sarakshi, you're better than me, because when I hear somebody using that word, I immediately switch off. I'm like, oh, come on, man. Like what are we even doing here? And one of the best ways of, I think, practically speaking, like if it's practically in our circle and with our friends and so on, one of the things which is most actually influential in changing people is having personal connections, right? And that actually has impacts much more than any kind of doctrinal argument or statistics and things. Not all the time, but for most people. So, just to remind ourselves that there are queer people here, there are trans people here. They have always been here, and they have always been part of who we are. For myself, one of the first things that I did after I left school, went to uni, I helped to organize this conference and worked together with a group of people, and with like environmental and some other things as well. And one of the people on that conference was a trans woman. And that was the first time that I'd met a trans woman, or at least someone who presented as a trans woman. And we worked together on this conference, and I got to know her a bit and so on. And so that for me was a really kind of interesting and very kind of formative experience. I got to hear about her challenges and her life and what she was doing and all of these kinds of things. And so that's been like part of my awareness since I've been a teenager. It's just a kind of normal part of things. Mary Wollstonecraft wrote in The Vindication of the Rights of Women, actually one of the women she talks about is a trans woman in that essay. That's like the foundational, one of the foundational feminist essays. And so it's been there right from the beginning. So maybe to try, if you're speaking with a group of people, maybe try reaching out, maybe try mentioning or like referring to or including other queer or trans people who are around you, right?
Yeah.
And like relating it to their own experience and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think one of the things is that you find people are in their own little silos, and when they're not
Right.
connected to other groups of people or know other people, it kind of separates them, and then it kind of impacts
Yeah.
their sort of political views as well. So yeah, I agree with you. That connection is really important, and when you know people, it makes a difference.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is what they've, as far as I understand, that like things like, say, acceptance of same-sex marriage and so on. The primary driver of change is actually knowing queer people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess the work that I do, I'm around a really diverse number of people, but some of my
Okay.
social groups aren't. So I think that's where I have that
Right.
opportunity to share. So no, that's really helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
What work do you do? But can I ask?
I'm an educational psychologist. So when you said
Really?
local government, I do work for local government, but I guess I was thinking of like politicians when you meant government. So
Oh
yeah.
no, it's civil servants. You work for the government. Ah, you're just in the closet, so to speak, or perhaps in the filing cabinet, so to speak. But yeah, well, great. This sounds like a really interesting work, and thank you for doing it because yeah, it's really
Thank
important.
you.
Casey, you also had your hand up.
Hi, Bhante. Thank you for this talk. I found it
No worries.
really, really nourishing. And yeah, it's definitely one I'm going to look back on. My question, so when I was young, I was quite involved in activism and politics and things like that. And I ended up getting really burnt out from it, overextending myself and starting to feel a deep sense of hopelessness, trying to work on things like racism and homophobia in the US. And yeah, hopelessness almost kind of bordering on despair. And since then, I've really stepped back almost entirely from politics. I found it very difficult to engage in them and engage in all the things happening in the world. So I'm conscious that we have very little time left, but I wondered if you had any tips. I think this talk is a start for me. I'm definitely going to come back, and I think it already gives me a foundation for kind of easing back into what I can reasonably do, and how it's. But I just wonder if you have any tips for how to re-engage in a kind of healthier way that doesn't lead to this kind of burnout and despair.
Yeah. Look, thank you for doing what you did, and I'm so sorry that happened. I mean, but this is like so common. It's like a normal thing, you know. When I first started doing activism with animal liberation in the 80s in WA, that was like one of the first things that we kind of learned about and discussed and so on. And sorry, I lost Casey. Where's she gone? Oh, there you are. Oh, sorry. So the grid shifted. I'd lost you. Yeah. So that's. Yeah, that's unfortunately is common. Again, I don't necessarily know that I have any solution. Obviously, having a spiritual practice, having some meditation, having some community, being able to talk about it, these things are obviously really good. But I would suggest that as much as possible, really the long-term solution is to focus on building something that's positive. And if your focus is always on reacting against things that are negative, then it's going to be really hard. You know, I'm not saying that people can't do that. I respect that because you have to protect people when they're being attacked and they're being vulnerable, and you have to do that. But it's really hard to maintain that, especially in the long term. So if you can, you focus on creating whatever community resources, or focusing on creating like social links, or focus on creating legal defenses, or whatever. You focus on creating something which is positive, that can be nourishing also for you, where you see the benefit of that. Because we can't build a world, like we can't build a better future if all we're doing is reacting against the bad things in the past. and we have to have a vision for the future. And I have to say that I feel that, generally speaking, this has been a failure of the progressive movement and of the left more generally, that we focus too much on what is wrong and fixing what is wrong, and we haven't offered enough of a vision of the future. And we've let that idea of the vision of the future be taken over by industrialists and technologists, and we've sort of assumed by default we're going to be living in a science fiction future of machines. And the older I get, the less I want to live in that future, and the more that I would like to live in a future that has some space for some trees and some bees and some flowers and some like people being relaxed and nice to each other, rather, rather than just dominated by the machine. Yeah. So to try to imagine a possible future that is meaningful and beautiful, right? And then to create something that is going to help us to move to that future. I think that's something to me that's really inspiring. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, very good. So I'm not sure, are we going to get kicked off after 90 minutes? I think Zoom sometimes does that. Is that what's going to happen here?
No, Venerable. I think if the questions are over, I probably do the wrapping up, Venerable, if that's okay.
Please, yeah.
Yeah. So thank you very much for coming today, Venerable, and talking this very essential topic. I mean, I had 3 questions I was writing. I think you answered one. I'm sure many of us have kind of thoughts and pondering on this after this talk, and many of us will come and watch this again. And so for all of us, I'd like to say a few words about dana, that is generosity. And it says giving develops wholesome qualities that form the foundation of our Dhamma practice. And generosity can also be a practice of checking in deeply with us. So here at Anukampa, we offer several ways that we can cultivate this beautiful quality of giving. We can do financial donations. There is a link that I have put. Through that, you can do a one-time donation of any amount, which is gratefully received, big or small. You can do bank transfers, PayPal, SumUp. You can, if you are able, you can do a regular donation through standing orders. You can do non-financial donations as well. Like if you have any expertise, you can talk to team at anukampaproject.org and discuss with them of your expertise and volunteer. During, we need organizing events, we need technical support. There's so many other things like that. Project management. And these days, because of Vasa, there's no meal requirement. But after the Vasa, we will have that as well. And there is a monastery needed items that will also be kind of more activated after the Vasa as well. And thank you very much for coming again and being part of Anukampa community. And thank you, Bhante, and we will have your wonderful teachings again next week.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Manori and Matthias and everybody else who's here for coming along, and been great to share some time with you today. And may you all be happy. See you next week.